He thought the apology had closed the chapter. Jeremy Clarkson thought the storm had passed. Prince Harry thought the past was finally buried. But when two men who never truly forgave each other sit under the same studio lights, even a smile can sound like an insult. And sometimes, the quietest words are the ones that end the show. The Jonathan Ross Show had seen its share of awkward moments over the years, but that night carried a different kind of electricity. Subtle, restrained, almost polite on the surface. The kind of tension that didn't announce itself loudly, but lingered in the air like unfinished business. Prince Harry arrived first. Dressed in a dark tailored suit with an open-collar shirt, he walked onto the stage with a composed expression, offering the audience a brief wave. His smile was practiced, measured, careful. The applause was warm, though not explosive. Harry nodded in acknowledgement, took his seat, and crossed his legs with deliberate calm. Jonathan Ross leaned toward him, relaxed as ever. "Harry, welcome. It's good to have you." "Good to be here," Harry replied, voice steady, eyes scanning the room. He looked calm, almost too calm. The first minutes unfolded smoothly. Jonathan asked about Harry's recent projects, his life in California, his focus on charity and mental health advocacy. Harry answered with ease, confident, articulate, occasionally slipping into the familiar rhythm of someone used to telling his story on his own terms. Then Jonathan smiled. "And joining us tonight," he said, glancing toward the other side of the stage, "is a man who never struggles to tell his story, Jeremy Clarkson." The audience reacted instantly, a mix of cheers, laughter, and something sharper beneath it. Jeremy Clarkson walked out slowly, hands loosely clasped, wearing a dark brown blazer and that unmistakable half-smirk, equal parts charm and provocation. He waved casually to the crowd, then turned toward Harry. For a fraction of a second, neither man spoke. Jeremy broke the silence first. "Evening." Harry nodded once. "Jeremy." Jonathan sensed it immediately. The temperature shift, the way the studio seemed to tighten around the two chairs now facing each other. "Now," Jonathan said lightly, trying to keep the tone buoyant. "I know people at home will be thinking the same thing, so let's address it up front. Jeremy, you and Harry have history." A ripple of laughter followed, but Harry didn't smile. Jeremy exhaled through his nose, a sound that almost, but not quite, resembled a chuckle. "I suppose that's one way to put it." Jonathan leaned back. "You did apologize, publicly. That's worth noting." Jeremy nodded. "I did, and I meant it." Harry tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on Jeremy. "Did you?" The question landed softly, but it landed. Jeremy turned toward him, unbothered. "Yes. Apologizing doesn't mean rewriting reality. Harry, it means acknowledging that words can go too far." Harry's jaw tightened, just a fraction. "Funny," he said calmly, "because some of your commentary didn't sound like words that went too far. It sounded like contempt." Jonathan raised a hand gently. "All right, let's keep this civil." Jeremy shrugged. "I don't dislike Harry, never have. I criticize public behavior. That's my job." Harry let out a short, humorless laugh. "Right, the job of deciding who deserves empathy and who doesn't." The audience shifted. Someone coughed. Jonathan glanced between them. Jeremy leaned back in his chair. "You chose to live publicly. You chose to tell your story, over and over again. At some point, people are allowed to respond." Harry leaned forward slightly now. "Responding is one thing, mockery is another." Jeremy met his gaze, unflinching. "And sensitivity has limits." There it was, the first crack. Jonathan tried to redirect. "Harry, do you think critics misunderstand you?" Harry didn't hesitate. "I think some critics profit from misunderstanding." Jeremy smiled, just a little. "Or maybe they profit from clarity." Harry's smile disappeared entirely. "You see," Harry said, voice still controlled but colder now, "this is exactly the problem. You dress cruelty up as honesty." Jeremy's tone remained casual. "And you dress resentment up as virtue." The audience gasped softly. Jonathan leaned forward again. "Let's slow this down." But Harry wasn't finished. "You apologized," he said, eyes locked on Jeremy. "And yet, here you are, still positioning yourself as the arbiter of morality, still talking about my family like it's a sport." Jeremy's expression didn't change, Your family made itself the conversation. The room went still. For the first time, Harry's composure visibly wavered. He inhaled, long and deliberate, then straightened in his chair. "This," he said quietly, "is exactly why apologies don't mean much when the mindset behind them stays the same." Jonathan could feel it slipping. He glanced toward the producers, then back at the guests. "Gentlemen," he said, forcing a smile, "we're just getting started." Jeremy folded his hands. "So am I." Harry leaned back, crossing his arms now, closed off, guarded. The smiles were gone. The politeness had thinned, and whatever this conversation was becoming, it was no longer a talk show interview. It was a reckoning, and everyone in that studio knew. The calm wouldn't last much longer. The applause that usually followed Jonathan Ross's smooth transitions never came. Instead, the studio sat in a strange half-silence, polite, restrained, but unmistakably alert. Everyone could feel it now. Whatever this conversation was turning into, it wasn't entertainment anymore. It was unfinished business. Jonathan cleared his throat, forcing a lighter tone. "Well, I suppose if we're already dancing around the elephant in the room, we might as well invite it fully onto the stage." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. "Jeremy," Jonathan continued, "you've said publicly that you regret some of the things you wrote and said. Harry, you've said apologies don't erase harm. Let's talk about that." Harry didn't look at Jonathan. His eyes were still fixed on Jeremy. "Apologies," Harry said evenly, "are meaningless if they are followed by the same behavior dressed up in softer language." Jeremy raised an eyebrow. "So, I'm not allowed to have an opinion ever again?" "You're allowed an opinion," Harry shot back. "You're not entitled to consequence-free cruelty." Jonathan lifted both hands slightly. "Okay, let's define cruelty." Jeremy leaned forward for the first time, elbows resting casually on his knees. "Cruelty is intent. What I did was commentary. I criticized politicians, celebrities, billionaires, and yes, royals. You're not special." Harry's lips pressed together. "You're right, I'm not special. But my wife was targeted in a way that went far beyond commentary." Jeremy exhaled slowly. "And I apologized for that." Harry's voice hardened. "Then why are you still framing it like a misunderstanding instead of an attack?" the audience murmured. Jonathan glanced at Jeremy, silently urging caution. Jeremy shrugged. "Because intent matters. I don't wake up thinking, how can I hurt Prince Harry today? I wake up thinking, what's happening in the world that deserves scrutiny?" Harry laughed quietly, this time with no humor at all. "Funny how scrutiny always seems to land on the same people." Jeremy tilted his head. "Or maybe those people keep putting themselves at the center of the story." That landed harder than Jeremy probably intended. Harry shifted in his seat, uncrossing his arms, leaning forward now. "I didn't ask to be born into this. I didn't ask to be turned into a spectacle." Jeremy didn't miss a beat. "But you did ask to monetize it." A collective intake of breath swept the studio. Jonathan's smile vanished. "Jeremy," but Harry cut him off. "There it is," Harry said sharply. "That smug little line you've been waiting to drop." Jeremy remained calm. "You wrote a book, you did interviews, you produced documentaries, you talk about the system constantly while profiting from it. People notice." Harry's voice rose just a notch. "Because telling the truth matters." "To whom?" Jeremy asked. "And how many times?" The audience was no longer murmuring. They were silent. Jonathan leaned forward again. "Harry, do you feel misunderstood by the public?" Harry didn't hesitate. "I feel deliberately misunderstood, especially by people who pretend to apologize while still enjoying the attention they get from provoking us." Jeremy smiled faintly. "You see, that's where we differ. I don't provoke to be liked. You provoke to be believed." Harry stared at him. "You think this is provocation? Talking about trauma?" Jeremy's tone sharpened slightly for the first time. "I think trauma becomes narrative when it's packaged and sold." Jonathan winced. "All right, let's—" Harry's hand lifted, not dramatically but firmly. "No, let him finish." Jeremy looked at him, surprised for a fraction of a second, then continued. "What I'm saying is simple. Pain doesn't make someone morally superior, and criticism isn't violence." Harry's jaw tightened visibly. You don't get to decide that. Jeremy nodded. And you don't get to silence it. The room felt smaller now, tighter. Even Jonathan's usual ease had evaporated. So, Jonathan said cautiously, do you two believe reconciliation is even possible? Harry answered immediately. Reconciliation requires accountability. Jeremy replied just as quickly. And accountability requires honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Harry leaned back again, crossing his arms harder this time. There's nothing honest about enjoying someone else's suffering. Jeremy looked genuinely puzzled. You think I enjoy this? Harry's eyes flashed. You built a career on it. That was the moment the audience shifted. Not in sound, but in posture. Backs straightened, heads tilted forward. Jeremy's smile faded, replaced by something cooler. I built a career on saying what others won't. If that bothers you, that's unfortunate. But it's not my responsibility to manage your feelings. Harry's voice dropped dangerously low. You've never had to, Jonathan interjected quickly. Harry, do you think media criticism played a role in your decision to step back from royal life? Harry's answer came sharp. It played a role in exposing who benefits from tearing others down. Jeremy let out a quiet laugh. You mean the press? Harry snapped his gaze back to him. You are the press. Jeremy leaned back now, folding his arms. And you are the story that never ends. That line hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. Harry stood still for a moment, eyes narrowing. Not angry yet, but something close, calculating, restraining. Jonathan sensed the shift. Let's take a breath. But Harry wasn't looking at Jonathan anymore. You apologized, Harry said slowly, each word measured. And I accepted it publicly. But this, he gestured between them, proves nothing actually changed. Jeremy met his stare. Maybe acceptance doesn't mean agreement. Harry's voice trembled, not loudly, but unmistakably. Maybe you don't understand what accountability actually costs. Jeremy leaned forward again, voice calm but firm. And maybe you don't understand that. Not everyone owes you validation. The audience froze. Jonathan swallowed. We're going to take a short break. But the damage was already done. Harry's hands were clenched now, knuckles pale. His smile was gone. His patience was thinning. And for the first time since he'd walked onto that stage, it was clear. He wasn't sure he wanted to stay, and whatever came next would decide whether this conversation ended in words or in silence. The studio lights dimmed slightly for the commercial break, but nothing else softened. No music, no chatter. Just the faint hum of equipment and the awareness that something irreversible had already cracked. Harry remained seated, but his posture had changed. He no longer leaned back like a guest. He leaned forward like someone preparing to stand his ground. Jeremy Clarkson sipped water calmly, almost deliberately, as if time itself worked in his favor. Jonathan Ross glanced between them, his instinct screaming that the next 5 minutes could define the entire episode. When the cameras rolled again, the red light blinked on like a warning. And we're back, Jonathan said, voice measured, careful. This has clearly struck a nerve, and I want to make sure we keep this conversation constructive. Harry exhaled through his nose. Constructive only works when both sides are willing to be honest. Jeremy nodded. Agreed. Jonathan seized the opening. Harry, let me ask you directly. Do you believe people like Jeremy should stop commenting on you and your family altogether? Harry turned toward Jonathan, but his answer was aimed squarely at Jeremy. No, he said. I believe people like Jeremy should stop pretending their words exist in a vacuum. Jeremy tilted his head. So, we're responsible for how you feel? For what you cause, Harry replied sharply. Jeremy's tone cooled. You keep framing this as harm, but you never allow the possibility that disagreement isn't abuse. Harry's jaw flexed. When disagreement punches down, it is. The audience stirred. Jonathan leaned in. Jeremy, do you feel your past comments crossed that line? Jeremy didn't hesitate. Yes, that's why I apologized. Harry's eyes narrowed. Then why are you still defending the mindset that produced them? Jeremy's reply came slower now. Because apologizing for words doesn't mean surrendering my worldview. That landed like a controlled detonation. Harry sat back, shaking his head slightly. This is exactly the problem. You want absolution without reflection. Jeremy scoffed quietly. And you want reflection without resistance. Jonathan interrupted, trying to redirect. Harry, many people say you've become increasingly sensitive to criticism since leaving royal duties. How do you respond to that? Harry laughed, short, bitter. Of course they do. Jeremy raised an eyebrow. Well, Harry turned to him. I respond by saying I finally stopped absorbing abuse silently. Jeremy countered, or you stopped tolerating disagreement. Harry leaned forward again. You reduce everything to semantics because it keeps you comfortable. Jeremy's voice sharpened. And you inflate everything into moral crisis because it keeps you relevant. The audience audibly reacted, half gasp, half stunned silence. Jonathan's hand tightened around his cue cards. Jeremy. No, Harry cut in, standing slightly from his seat before catching himself. He remained upright, hovering. Say it. Say what you really think. Jeremy met his gaze evenly. I think you've confused vulnerability with authority. Harry's face flushed. And I think you've confused arrogance with courage. A beat. Then another. Jonathan tried again. Harry, do you ever worry that confronting critics this way only fuels the cycle? Harry's voice dropped, controlled, but shaking beneath the surface. The cycle exists whether I speak or not. The difference is, now I refuse to play the silent role you all preferred. Jeremy folded his arms. No one preferred you silent. We preferred you honest without theatrics. Harry snapped. You don't get to define my honesty. Jeremy's eyes hardened for the first time. And you don't get to declare yourself immune from scrutiny. The studio felt like it was holding its breath. Jonathan stood up slightly, palms open. Gentlemen, please. This is turning personal. Harry turned sharply toward him. It was always personal. Then, back to Jeremy. You built a persona on provocation, Harry said. And when it finally backfires, you hide behind free speech. Jeremy stood his ground. And you built a persona on grievance, and call it growth. The audience gasped openly now. Jonathan's voice cracked just slightly. All right, I'm stepping in. Harry laughed again, louder this time. Of course you are. Jeremy looked at Jonathan. Let him speak. Harry's eyes burned. You don't want that? Jeremy shrugged. I'm not afraid of it. Harry stepped fully forward now, no longer seated. You think this is debate, he said. For you, it's sport. For me, it's my life. Jeremy didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. And for the rest of the world, he said, it's a story that never changes. Harry's hands clenched. Because people like you won't let it. Jeremy replied quietly, or because you won't stop telling it. Silence crashed down, thick and suffocating. Jonathan looked off camera, panic flickering across his face. Producers were whispering frantically. Someone gestured a cutting motion across their throat. Harry noticed. He straightened, chest rising and falling. You know what? He said slowly. This is exactly why I shouldn't have come. Jeremy didn't smile. That, we finally agree. Jonathan stepped forward urgently. Harry, please, let's not end it like this. Harry turned toward the audience, then back to Jeremy one last time. You wanted honesty, Harry said. Here it is. You don't challenge power, you exploit pain. Jeremy stood as well now, meeting him eye to eye. And you don't challenge narratives, he said. You replace them with yourself. The studio erupted, not in applause, but in raw, uncontrollable noise. Harry stared at him, breathing hard. He hadn't walked yet, but everyone in that room knew he was closer than ever, and whatever happened next wouldn't be moderated, redirected, or softened. It would end one way or another. The studio had reached a point of no return. The audience wasn't watching a talk show anymore. They were witnessing a standoff. Two men standing under hot lights, neither willing to retreat, both aware that the next sentence would decide everything. Jonathan Ross stood between them now, visibly shaken, not angry, not theatrical, just deeply aware that control had slipped through his fingers. Harry, Jonathan said quietly, almost pleading, please, sit down, let's reset. Harry didn't move. His eyes were locked on Jeremy Clarkson, but his jaw was set in a way that suggested something deeper than irritation. This wasn't about a joke anymore, or an article, or an apology. This was about dignity. "You know what's fascinating?" Harry said, voice low but carrying effortlessly across the studio. "You talk about narrative fatigue, but you've built an entire career on repeating the same provocation until people mistake it for truth." Jeremy exhaled slowly. "And you've built yours on insisting that your pain is untouchable." Jonathan raised a hand. "Jeremy—" "No," Jeremy said calmly. "He asked for honesty." Harry let out a sharp laugh. "Honesty from you?" Jeremy nodded. "Yes." The audience murmured. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one blinked. Jeremy continued, his tone still measured, still restrained, but now unmistakably firm. "You want accountability from the press, from commentators, from the public, but you never accept that stepping into the spotlight means being questioned, not worshipped, questioned." Harry stepped closer. "I didn't step into the spotlight," he said. "I was born under it." "And yet," Jeremy replied, "you've monetized it beautifully." That was the moment. The room changed. Harry's face hardened, not flushed, not wild, just cold. Jonathan knew it instantly. He'd seen anger before. This wasn't anger. This was decision. "Say that again," Harry said. Jeremy didn't hesitate. "You criticize the system while profiting from the attention it gives you." Jonathan moved sharply now. "All right, that's enough." Harry turned toward him, eyes blazing. "No, it's not." He looked back at Jeremy. "You think leaving was easy?" Harry snapped. "You think walking away from my family, my country, my identity was a brand strategy?" Jeremy didn't raise his voice. "I think you left a role you didn't like, and then demanded applause for it." Gasps rippled through the audience. Someone whispered, "Oh no." Harry's breathing quickened. "You don't know a thing about sacrifice," he said. "You sit here, protected by irony, mocking things you'll never understand." Jeremy stepped forward too now, closing the distance. "And you," he said quietly, "hide behind trauma every time someone disagrees with you." Jonathan raised both hands. "Gentlemen, please." Harry cut him off. "This is why conversations like this are pointless," Harry said bitterly. "You don't want dialogue. You want dominance." Jeremy replied instantly. "And you don't want debate. You want immunity." The audience was silent now, completely silent. Harry looked around the studio, at the cameras, the audience, Jonathan Ross frozen between them. Then he laughed, not loud, not theatrical, resigned. "You know what?" he said. "I was warned about this." Jeremy raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" Harry smiled thinly. "By people who said you never actually listen. You just wait for your turn to wound." Jeremy shook his head. "That's projection." That word landed harder than anything else. Harry stepped back suddenly. "Enough," he said. Jonathan leaned forward. "Harry, we can still—" "No," Harry said firmly. "We can't." He turned to the audience. "I came here for a conversation," he said. "Not a character assassination dressed up as intellectual honesty." Jeremy crossed his arms. "And I came here to challenge ideas, not babysit entitlement." That did it. Harry reached down, picked up the microphone clipped to his jacket, and removed it with deliberate care. The sound echoed. Click. The audience gasped. Jonathan froze. "Harry, don't!" Harry placed the microphone on the chair. "You've made your point," Harry said, looking directly at Jeremy. "Enjoy the applause." Jeremy didn't smile. "I don't need it." Harry nodded once, a single final nod. Then he turned and walked, not rushed, not storming, just walking away. The cameras followed him instinctively as he crossed the stage. The audience split between stunned silence and whispered disbelief. A producer rushed toward the exit, unsure whether to stop him or clear the path. Jonathan stood motionless. Jeremy remained where he was, hands at his sides, expression unreadable. When the studio doors closed behind Harry, the sound was unmistakable, final. Jonathan exhaled shakily and turned toward the camera. "Well," he said softly, voice barely steady, "that was not how tonight was meant to end." The audience didn't laugh. Jeremy finally spoke again, quietly. "Sometimes," he said, "the truth doesn't need the last word. It just needs the room." Jonathan nodded slowly, swallowing. We'll take a break. The screen faded to black. By morning, headlines would explode. Some would call Harry brave. Others would call him thin-skinned. Some would praise Jeremy's restraint. Others would condemn his cruelty. But no one would deny one thing. That night, on Jonathan Ross's stage, Prince Harry didn't lose his temper. He lost his patience. And when he walked away, he left behind something far louder than an argument. An empty chair that said everything. Some interviews end with answers. Others end with silence. And sometimes, the silence speaks louder than any argument. If you enjoy high-tension, real-time confrontations like this one, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for the next story, where one moment changes everything.